Imagine waking up in the middle of the night, your eyes open, but your body refuses to move. The room is silent, yet you can feel a heavy presence pressing down on your chest. You try to scream, but no sound escapes your lips, and then you see it. A shadow standing at the foot of your bed, staring, waiting. This isn't just a nightmare, this is sleep paralysis. And tonight, I'll share with you 5 terrifying true encounters that will make you think twice before closing your eyes. It always began the same way, a sudden awakening in the dead of night, the kind where silence is so thick it feels almost alive. The narrator remembered opening their eyes, only to find that their body would not respond. Their chest felt unbearably heavy, as though a great weight had been placed upon them, pressing down harder with each attempt to move. Breathing became shallow and difficult, as if the air itself was resisting entry into their lungs. Panic quickly set in as their minds screamed for their arms to twitch, for their legs to kick, for their lips to form even the faintest whisper, but nothing answered the desperate commands. Their body was a prison, frozen under the crushing pressure. The most horrifying part came not from the paralysis itself, but from what entered the room. At first it was only a subtle shift in the darkness, a flicker near the corner of the ceiling, where shadows stretched unnaturally. Then came the sensation of being watched, an unmistakable awareness that someone or something else was in the room. The weight on the chest grew heavier, and with it, the certainty that the force pressing down was no longer just a trick of the mind. It felt deliberate, purposeful, and alive. The narrator's eyes darted frantically, searching the dim outline of the room, and that was when they saw it. A figure crouched on their chest, its body unnaturally long and thin, its eyes like hollow pits swallowing what little light dared to exist in the room. Its hands were bony and cold, pressed firmly against the narrator's ribs as though pinning them to the bed. Its face was close, too close, almost brushing against theirs, as it tilted its head slowly from side to side, studying its victim with the eerie patience of something that did not need to breathe. The figure made no sound, yet the silence was deafening, filled with a pressure that felt more suffocating than the weight itself. The narrator could smell something fall, damp and rotten, drifting from the creature's mouth as it opened just slightly, revealing rows of teeth too sharp and too many to be human. In that moment, the narrator realized it wasn't just a shadow or a dream, but something much older, something that fed on fear itself, pressing its weight down on helpless bodies night after night, waiting for the moment when the line between waking and death finally blurred. The night had been ordinary, calm and quiet, until the narrator woke with the strange sensation that something was wrong. Their eyes opened reluctantly, and they found themselves staring into the darkness of their bedroom. At first it seemed empty, just the familiar outlines of furniture blurred, in the faint glow of moonlight slipping through the curtains. But then came the realization they couldn't move. Their arms, their legs, even their tongue refused to respond, leaving them trapped within their own body. Fear began to ripple through their mind, a cold dread spreading from the pit of their stomach to the tips of their fingers that refused to twitch. As they lay there, paralyzed, a new terror crept in. Something was watching them. It was not a vague sensation, but an overwhelming certainty, as if unseen eyes were fixed upon them from somewhere just beyond the veil of the dark. Their heart raced faster and faster, pounding in their ears, and with each beat came the growing knowledge that they were not alone. Slowly, carefully, their gaze shifted toward the corner of the room, and that was when they saw them. Eyes. Not one pair, but several glowing faintly, hovering in the shadows where no figure should have been. These eyes were unblinking, large and too bright to be mistaken for tricks of light. They glimmered with an unnatural intelligence, and the longer the narrator stared, the more pairs seemed to emerge, as if the darkness itself was birthing new watchers. Each pair locked onto them, sharp and predatory, and with every passing second, the room felt smaller, more suffocating. The air thickened, heavy with something unseen, and a low hum began to pulse through the silence, a vibration that crawled across their skin. The eyes began to move, circling slowly around the bed, but no bodies revealed themselves, only the orbs gliding through the dark. They hovered closer, inch by inch, as though savoring the fear. The narrator's breathing quickened, shallow and desperate, but no sound could escape. A chill spread across their face as one set of eyes floated mere inches above, peering directly into theirs, wide and merciless. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, the moment suspended in terror, until the eyes blinked in unison and vanished into the black, leaving behind only silence and the memory of being hunted by something that thrived in the unseen corners of the night. The night began like any other, with the narrator lying in bed, drifting in and out of restless sleep, until suddenly they became aware of their surroundings with a jolt. Their eyes opened, but once again their body was frozen, locked in the same cruel paralysis that had plagued them before. At first, everything seemed quiet, too quiet, as though the world outside had stopped moving altogether. They tried to calm themselves, reminding their panicked mind that it was just sleep paralysis, a trick of the brain. But reassurance quickly dissolved when they sensed the unmistakable weight of someone standing at the foot of the bed. It was not a noise that alerted them, but a shift in the air, a coldness that spread across the room as if the warmth had been drained away. Their gaze, restricted by the inability to turn their head, locked onto a shadowy form. A woman was standing there, her figure faint but unmistakable, tall and thin, her head slightly tilted, as if studying the helpless figure beneath the blankets. The moonlight leaking through the curtains revealed the long strands of her hair, stringy and damp, clinging to her face as though she had just emerged from water. She did not move, not at first, and that stillness made her presence unbearable. The narrator's heart pounded so loudly it seemed the sound would fill the room, but the woman remained motionless watching. Then she began to shift, her movements slow and unnatural, as though each joint bent reluctantly, bones creaking under the strain. Step by step, she moved closer to the bed, her bare feet making no sound against the floor. Her head tilted further, and with each tilt, her hair revealed glimpses of her face, sunken eyes too dark and too deep, a mouth that seemed slightly open, not in breath but in a silent scream that never ended. She stopped only inches from the narrator's body, looming over them, the stench of mildew and earth filling the air. Her hand lifted, long fingers stretched unnaturally, reaching toward their chest. They could feel the cold radiating from her touch before it even landed, a coldness that seeped deep into their skin, as though she was trying to pull something from inside. The paralysis held them captive, unable to thrash or scream, as her face lowered until it hovered directly above theirs, her empty eyes locking them in place as the air around them seemed to vanish completely. The paralysis came without warning, snapping the narrator out of a dream and pinning them in a reality far more terrifying. Their eyes opened wide, but their body betrayed them, heavy and unresponsive as if chains held them to the bed. Panic swelled instantly, the kind that only grows when the body refuses to obey even the simplest command. They tried to call out, but their voice was trapped, the air caught in their throat, their lips pressed shut by an invisible force. What came instead was a soundless attempt at a scream, a desperate, frozen cry that echoed only in their mind. The silence of the room felt unbearable, broken only by the pounding of their heartbeat in their ears. Then, faintly, another sound emerged, a whisper, thin and distorted, rising from the corner of the room. At first it was too soft to make sense of, but it grew louder, carrying syllables that twisted into their name. The narrator's eyes darted frantically, and in the dim light, shadows read along the walls, stretching unnaturally as though alive. The whisper became many, overlapping voices speaking in tones too warped to fully understand, yet all directed at them, pulling them deeper into fear. Suddenly, their eyes caught movement near the ceiling. A figure hung there, clinging upside down like an insect, its limbs impossibly bent, its face shrouded in darkness except for its mouth, which stretched wide into a grotesque grin. The voices ceased, replaced by the heavy sound of breathing that did not come from the narrator. The figure began to move, crawling slowly down the wall, each motion jerky and unsettling, the sound of bones cracking echoing with every shift. The narrator struggled harder against the paralysis, their chest burning with the effort of trying to release a scream that would not come. Their silent pleas for help echoed inside their head, but the figure crept closer, its grin never faltering. It reached the foot of the bed, crouched low, and began to climb onto the mattress with deliberate slowness, savoring every second of their terror. Its face emerged from the shadows, eyes wide and glassy, reflecting a sickly gleam, the grin now so wide it seemed to split its face. It leaned close, so near they could feel the icy air spilling from its mouth, and in the final moment before their vision blurred, the silent scream inside them reached its breaking point. The room was silent when the narrator's eyes opened, but the stillness felt wrong, like the calm before something dreadful. They instantly realized they could not move, their arms locked against the mattress, their legs heavy as if tied down. The weight of paralysis pressed over them, and fear spread like wildfire through their chest. They strained to listen, hoping the silence would remain unbroken, but then it came, a faint whisper, soft and deliberate, curling through the darkness. It was not the wind, nor a dream, but a voice, one that seemed to rise from the shadows themselves. The whisper grew clearer, and to their horror, it called their name. The sound was stretched, drawn out, almost mocking, as if the unseen presence was savoring their fear. Their eyes scanned the room desperately, shifting from corner to corner, but no figure revealed itself. The whisper repeated their name again, closer this time, the syllables brushing against their ears though no one was there. They wanted to scream, to force out even a whimper, but their lips would not part. All they could do was lie helpless as the darkness thickened around them. Something moved by the doorway, a flicker of shadow that should not have been there. The whispering grew louder, overlapping with other voices, distorted and inhuman, as if a chorus of unseen figures surrounded the bed. The air grew heavier, colder, making it harder to breathe, as though invisible hands were pressing against their chest. A shape began to form in the corner, a tall, faceless figure that swayed unnaturally, its movements jerky like a puppet pulled by tangled strings. The voices grew frantic now, hissing, calling, urging, their tones shifting between whispers and guttural snarls. The figure in the corner tilted its head, a grotesque crack echoing through the silence, and began moving closer. Each step seemed to stretch, impossibly long, covering distance far too quickly. Its faceless head bent low, lingering inches from the narrator's ear. And in that moment all the voices stopped except one. It whispered their name again, slowly, deliberately, almost tenderly, but beneath the softness was something sinister. A promise that this was not the last time they would hear it. The room pulsed with oppressive silence, the kind that made every beat of their heart feel like it could shatter the air. As the faceless figure loomed ever closer, the paralysis gripped the narrator the moment they became aware of the room around them. Their eyes were wide open, their bodies stiff, their breathing shallow as though a heavy weight pressed against their chest. They tried to reassure themselves that it was the same terrifying cycle they had experienced before, a cruel trick of the mind, but that fragile comfort shattered when they noticed movement beside them. Slowly, cautiously, they turned their gaze to the right and froze in horror. Someone was lying there, someone who looked exactly like them. It was not just a vague resemblance. The figure had the same hair, the same face, the same still posture, mirroring every detail as though an exact duplicate had been placed on the bed. The sight twisted their stomach with dread, because it was not like seeing a reflection in a mirror. It was as though their very soul had been pulled from their body, and now existed beside them, silent and motionless. For a few heartbeats, the figure did not move at all, its chest rising in unison with theirs, breathing as they breathed. Then, suddenly, it shifted. Its head turned toward them, the motion sharp and unnatural, and its eyes snapped open. The eyes were not quite human. They held the same color and shape, but they gleamed too brightly, almost glowing in the dark. They stared with a focus that felt invasive, piercing straight through the narrator, as if peeling away every layer of thought and fear. The doppelganger smiled slowly, an expression too wide, too deliberate, stretching its features into something uncanny. It began to inch closer, its body bending in stiff, jerky movements, the mattress dipping under its weight until it pressed against them. The narrator's heart pounded furiously, panic surging as they fought against the paralysis with all their strength, but their body remained unresponsive. The double leaned in until its face hovered only inches away, still smiling, its eyes unblinking and unnatural. The air grew icy cold, the room suffocating under the pressure of something unexplainable. The figure tilted its head, studying them with cruel curiosity, and then it opened its mouth. No words came out, only a low guttural sound that vibrated in the air like a growl, a sound that belonged to no human voice. Its face inched closer still, as though it was preparing to crawl inside them, to replace them entirely. The narrator woke with the crushing realization that they could not move, their bodies stiff and heavy as though invisible chains pinned them to the mattress. Their chest rose in shallow, panic breaths, every inhale sharp and unsteady as fear spread through their veins. The silence of the room was thick, unnatural, and they could hear the faint pounding of their heartbeat echoing louder than anything else. Then, without warning, a new sensation began. Something icy cold wrapped around their ankles. At first it felt like a draft of air brushing against their skin, but it quickly grew more defined, the unmistakable grip of fingers curling tight. The pressure was undeniable, squeezing harder, dragging downward with slow determination. The narrator's eyes darted toward the end of the bed, but no figure stood there, only darkness that seemed to ripple like liquid shadows. Their mind screamed for movement, for resistance, but their body remained rigid, helpless as the invisible hands began pulling harder. The sheets shifted slightly, tugged by an unseen force, and the weight on their legs grew unbearable. It was as though something beneath the bed was clawing at them, trying to drag them down into the void that lurked just out of sight. The sensation spread. More hands, countless and cold, grasped at their calves and thighs, tugging in unison. Panic overwhelmed every thought as their bodies slid slightly against the mattress, the pull undeniable and real. The sound of scratching filled the room, nails clawing against wood, echoing from beneath the bed frame as though hundreds of claws raked at once. The narrator's breaths grew shallow, desperate, the room spinning in suffocating dread. Their eyes strained to look downward, and for a fleeting second, they saw them. Dark, skeletal fingers curling up from the shadows beneath the bed, gripping tightly onto their skin. The sight froze them in place, terror magnified beyond anything they had ever felt. The dragging grew stronger, their legs nearly yanked completely off the mattress, the rest of their body trembling against the unmovable prison of paralysis. They tried to scream to plead, but their throat released only silence. The sensation of being pulled downward intensified, as though the hands were intent on dragging them into some unseen abyss beneath the bed, a place that felt endless and suffocating, a place from which there would be no return. The paralysis set in. Before the narrator even realized they were awake, a suffocating heaviness that pressed them flat against the bed. Their eyes scanned the room, desperate to make sense of the creeping dread that had settled in their chest. The darkness seemed thicker than usual, clinging to every corner and swallowing the familiar shapes of their room. They tried to steady their breath, to convince themselves it was only another episode, but then they saw it, something standing in the corner watching. At first, it looked like a shadow, barely visible against the dark walls, but as their vision adjusted, details began to sharpen. A figure stood there, tall and unnervingly thin, its body motionless as though carved from the darkness itself. What froze the narrator's blood was not the shape of it, but the face. Even from across the room, they could make out its grin, unnaturally wide, stretching impossibly across its face, its teeth gleaming faintly in the dim light. The smile never wavered, fixed and grotesque, like a mask that couldn't be removed. The longer they stared, the more the figure seemed to lean forward, without moving its feet, as though the space between them was collapsing. Its smile widened further, the teeth now too many too sharp, and its head tilted slowly to the side in a motion that felt taunting. The narrator's chest tightened with panic, their attempts to scream strangled by the invisible weight pressing down on them. They could only watch as the figure began to move, not walking, but gliding, the shadows shifting unnaturally beneath it. The grinning figure stopped just at the edge of the bed, looming over them. Its face was now clear and possibly close, the grin stretching so wide it threatened to split the skin of its cheeks. Its eyes were hollow sockets, dark voids that seemed to drink in every ounce of light. The narrator's breath came in shallow gasps, the icy air filling their lungs as the figure leaned closer, its smile so close that the sharp teeth seemed inches from their throat. It did not speak, it did not blink, it only grinned wider, its hollow gaze fixed on their helpless body, as though feeding off their terror, savoring every second of their fear, while the room grew colder and darker around them. The paralysis struck like a sudden storm, leaving the narrator frozen between sleep and wakefulness. Their eyes darted wildly across the ceiling, heart pounding against their ribs, yet their body refused to obey even the smallest command. The air in the room was unnaturally heavy, thick enough that every breath felt like it dragged through water. A ringing sound filled their ears, faint at first, then swelling into a low, vibrating hum that made the walls seem to tremble. They sensed something was different this time, something more dangerous, as if the barrier between life and death had thinned, and they were lying directly on the threshold. A shadow passed over them, not from outside the room but from within it, as though the air itself had split apart. Their eyes caught sight of a shape forming above them, floating just inches from the ceiling. It twisted and pulsed like smoke, but the longer they stared, the clearer its outline became. A figure with elongated limbs and a hollow face loomed there, its body bending unnaturally, as if it were made of nothing but sinew and darkness. Its movements were slow but deliberate, descending inch by inch, lowering itself closer to where they lay paralyzed. The sound grew louder, no longer a hum but a deep vibrating growl, resonating inside their skull. The figure's face tilted forward, and though it had no features, they could feel its attention locked on them, burning into their mind. The air thinned further, their chest rising with painful effort, their lungs screaming for oxygen. They tried to shut their eyes, to block out the horror, but the paralysis held them open, forcing them to watch as the shadow closed in. When it reached the edge of the bed, its arms extended. Impossibly long, the skeletal fingers brushing against the sheets. The fabric rippled as though touched by something solid, undeniable proof that what hovered above them was no dream. Its head hovered directly over theirs now, the void of its face swallowing every fragment of light, and the growl reverberated deep inside their chest. For a moment, it felt as though their very soul was being pulled upward, detached from their body, caught between the figure's grasp and the fragile tether holding them to life. As the shadows press closer with suffocating intent, the final chapter begins with the narrator drifting into what should have been ordinary sleep, only to be pulled into the familiar grip of paralysis. At first, the room is silent, almost too calm, with only the faint sound of their heartbeat echoing inside their ears. They try to brace themselves for the same terror that had visited before. The weight, the shadows, the whispers. But what comes this time feels heavier, more final, as though every previous encounter had only been a prelude to this one moment. The air grows icy cold, colder than any winter night, and the room darkens beyond recognition, the outlines of furniture melting into shadows. The silence shatters with a low groan, deep and resonant, vibrating through the floorboards. From every corner of the room, shadows begin to gather, creeping together, until they form a single towering figure at the foot of the bed. It is faceless, immense, its body shifting like smoke and bone, and with every breath the narrator takes, it swells larger, filling the space with suffocating dread. Unlike before, this figure does not remain distant. It begins to advance, each step deliberate, its presence pushing down like a crushing weight on the narrator's chest. As it nears, the shadows around it stretch outward, crawling up the bedposts and sliding across the sheets until they coil around the narrator's limbs. For the first time, they feel themselves not just paralyzed but bound, pinned in place by something far stronger than the usual immobility. Their lungs burn with the effort of each shallow breath, and they can feel the icy tendrils creeping closer, wrapping around their throat. The entity leans over, and though it has no face, a mouth forms out of the darkness, jagged and wide, releasing a chorus of whispers that sound like thousands of voices overlapping. Each one hisses the same thing, calling the narrator's name, promising release, demanding surrender. Terror surges through every nerve, but beneath it, something stronger begins to rise. A deep, desperate refusal. The narrator focuses every ounce of willpower on breaking free, fighting the crushing weight, the icy hands, the suffocating darkness. At first, nothing changes, but then, a flicker of control returns. Their fingers twitch. Their jaw tightens. A spark of defiance cuts through the fear. The shadows writhe violently, the figure screeching in a soundless howl, as though the act of resistance wounds it. With a final surge of strength, the narrator forces a scream from their throat, a raw, primal sound that shatters the silence. In an instant, the shadows collapse, the figure disintegrates into smoke, and the weight lifts. The paralysis breaks, and the narrator jolts upright in bed, drenched in sweat, lungs gasping for air. The room is once again still, familiar, safe, but the memory of what happened remains burned into their mind. This was not just another encounter. It was the culmination of every horror they had endured, and though they had survived, they knew sleep would never feel the same again. Thank you so much for joining me through these chilling journeys into the world of sleep paralysis. Your support means everything, and I hope these stories kept you on the edge of your seat. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more terrifying tales. Until next time, sleep well if you can.